So to start with, I feel like the Muslim stories of partition are not told. Mainstream British history and nationalist Indian history do not do justice to the Muslim narrative. Muslims feel unheard. Bollywood and Hollywood are showing one-sided perspectives, and Muslims are depicted as villains. Pakistan and Muhammad Jinnah are generally vilified, and this all feeds into Islamophobia. So as Riz Ahmed states, the Islamophobia industry kills, and this is his quote: "The representation of Muslims feeds the policies that get enacted, the people that get killed, and the countries that get invaded." So this is not harmless. So I want to talk just briefly about my family story. So my family has been separated due to partition. My dad's family stayed in India while he migrated to Pakistan in his early 20s. We struggled to get visas still to visit my chacha, who lives in Agra, and my aunts who live in Lucknow. And the last time we saw my chacha here, who's in front of the Taj Mahal, he doesn't live too far from there, was 13 years ago. And before that, I had never seen him. So I think that's a really sad part of partition history. My mother's family, many of whom are here today, and our elders are here, they fled Delhi in India as refugees. And they stayed in refugee camps in Karachi. And I found this all out because last year I interviewed Shahi Chacha, who's here, my mum's uncle. And there's a video, I think I saw him. Shahi Chacha? There he is. And I did a video with him, an oral history video last year, which I can share after this event. So he told me more about the history. And the family stayed in refugee trip by car when she was 12, and you just never stop hearing about it. But yeah, it sounds nice. I don't think you could do it now. And then when they came to London, and this is what you touch about a bit in your book, it was totally, culture shock. It wasn't very friendly. It was cold. I think you came here and it was raining. It was chucking down with rain, and people weren't that friendly. There was racism. There was Islamophobia. They didn't speak English. My mum didn't speak English, so it was adjusting completely to a whole different lifestyle. Colonialism, divide and rule, and destruction and looting of the wealth of India. It's the stories of Indians, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis, and it's the direct cause of the issues that are there still in that region today. And when I'm talking about Pakistan today, I mean both West and East Pakistan, what is now modern-day Bangladesh. So partition affected all people of all religions, and 15 million people were displaced, and more than 1 million were killed, at least. Historian Yasmin Khan calls it one of the 20th century's darkest moments. So we hear about all the ethnic cleansing and people from different faiths killing each other, but there was also really good people that were there trying to protect others of different faiths to the risk of their own lives as well. And the British were out of there, and they left all these communal hostilities behind them and didn't look back. So how did it happen? So we need to go a little bit further back. So before the British came to India, it was ruled by the Mughal Empire since 1526, and Emperor Babur was the first Mughal emperor. And he was from Central Asia. They were Timurid, descended from the Mongol warrior and king Timur. So the reason the British came to India, obviously because of its vast wealth, trade opportunities, there was textiles, spices, jewels, all of this was very desired in Europe. And obviously it was very wealthy. So India's wealth actually was depleted by the British completely. The riches were looted, which we all know about, and you can find a lot of that loot here in Britain, in museums and stately homes. The British were brutal rulers, and I just wanted to mention Tipu Sultan because he was one of the last strong opponents against the British in India, and he was a very rich and cultured ruler. His jewellery, his many books were all looted, and his famous toy tiger that was seen mauling a European soldier is housed in the V&A Museum in South Kensington, and it's been there since the late 1800s. So the British came, they imposed their structures and their governance. They came and turned the official language of India. We were disputing whether it was Persian or Urdu, maybe it was both, and they turned it into English in 1835. Lord Macaulay was responsible for that, and he famously said, Shashi Tharoor quotes this in his book, Inglorious Empire, that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. It had been systematically broken down by the British since they controlled India in order to defeat the Mughals, who were their big rivals. Muslims were viewed with suspicion and dislike by the British and wrongly seen as the instigators of the 1857 War of Independence, which was actually, all people were involved in that. And they were all joined together actually to try and reinstate the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar II. And so after 1857, they were treated even worse than that. And in 1857, the Indian Muslim became an almost subhuman creature to be classified in 1885, a group of Indian nationalists founded the Indian National Congress. And then later in 1906, the Muslim League was formed in order to safeguard the rights of India's large Muslim population. The key players in the fight for freedom were Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the first Governor General of Pakistan. Gandhi is famous for his tactic of non-violence and civil disobedience. He urged Indians to stitch their own clothes using traditional handlooms, and he was responsible for bringing the masses to the Congress, whereas before it was quite an elite organisation. However, not everybody in the Congress agreed with what Gandhi's approach was, and he had opposition even from within his party. His back to basic ways were seen as outdated by some. So the Congress were always committed to a united, undivided India and were not willing to negotiate on this. He didn't get on with Gandhi, he didn't like Gandhi's politics, he didn't like his approach of civil disobedience, he didn't like the way he was bringing religion into politics, ironically, and so he slowly distanced himself from the Congress. And so he decided, right, I'm going to go to England for a few years, I've had enough of this, and he was a very successful barrister here, and he thought about entering British politics. But then he was asked to come back by the Muslim League to lead them. So he did return. Why he returned, that is debated amongst historians. Maybe he saw an opportunity, maybe he wanted power, or perhaps some say a genuine commitment to Pakistan. Pakistan is a land of beauty and diversity. It was voted the best holiday destination by Condé Nast in 2020, and it's still an enticing place for vloggers and influencers. In the aftermath of partition, this is when reality hit home. People found themselves on the other side of the border from where they called home. And families had to split because they had to pick their home as India or Pakistan. And nobody realized at the time that they would probably never be able to see their homeland again. Pakistani writer Saadat Hasan Manto wrote a satirical story called Toba Tek Singh in 1955, which reflects this madness of partition. So the story revolves around residents of an asylum in Lahore who are being transferred from Pakistan to India, following the announcement of partition. So one of the inmates, Bishan Singh, finds out that his home falls under Pakistan and he refuses to leave, and then he dies sadly in the no man's land between the two borders. To pillage a large part of the world and grew rich on other people's wealth and resources. Fatima Manji, in her book Hidden Heritage, aptly calls this historic amnesia.
So it was because of my father. I'm really close to him, and it was to preserve his legacy for the grandchildren that didn't meet him and great-grandchildren. So it was for his friends, his family, and I wanted my father's memory and his legacy to go on. But he's an ordinary man, and Naomi Robert did say to me, and I totally agree with her, that this won't sell. He's not a famous person, but it was because I delved deeper into the partition of India and the birth of Pakistan, that it just became this whole big thing.
Why you know my family, because that's where they were living, and you also said that you lost everything, which was a familiar story, because obviously people had to, they didn't have time. The way that partition was done in such a quick manner, didn't know where you were going to be. People thought maybe that they could stay, but then you mentioned in your book that your grandfather, I think, was planning to stay, but then it got more and more dangerous. And he even asked for Gurkhas. He was friends with Gurkhas to protect the home, and it just became such a situation that they just couldn't stay like that for the safety of their family. So they left everything more or less. And you also mentioned that the money, and I didn't think about this, that the money from India stopped being valid in Pakistan after a certain time. You said you saw, you mentioned about children studying under lamps in the streets, so I can't even imagine that. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you where you got your stories from, and if they ever spoke about what it was like to be a refugee in Pakistan.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So really from my mother, and alhamdulillah, my dad's one of 7. He was the first to pass away, and then his elder sister. So I interviewed all his siblings, and sadly, they didn't actually get to read it, most of them. But I interviewed them extensively, and even my uncle, who's an introvert, he just couldn't stop talking about it. The older ones, the older 2, and my, his sisters, mainly his younger sister, but it was my mother. She's, alhamdulillah, got a really good memory, because these stories I didn't actually know about at all, and that's where I got the information from. And it was a long thing, because everyone's going to say, oh, your dad was a good person and this, but he had flaws like everyone else. So it was actually for a family thing, but I just studied so much because I felt a responsibility. If I made a mistake, then that would be out there, so I had to be really strict. So I actually thought I'd only read 3 books, but when I listened to Naima and I did bibliography, and if you've got the book, if you look at it later, I did podcasts, YouTube, there's a whole, everyone's telling their stories now, Sikh, Muslim, Hindus, and there are Christians as well, but it was just, we need to keep telling these stories, because people are dying and their stories will die with them.
So your dad, I love this story, your dad travelled to from Pakistan to London many times, and I hear this from Mum, and Shai Chacha said that our Dada did that, and my grandfather did that, and so I thought it was quite rare. And then you mentioned that your dad did it quite a bit, and can you recount any of those trips, and also the trip here? How did you get here?
So there were loads of trips and each other. So my grandmother, B, was very glamorous, and she saw my mum was very, she looked after her eldest and the youngest. She helped bring up lots of children. She's very amiable and friendly and hospitable. Yeah, so my mum's really beautiful. So mashallah. And she couldn't come today. She wasn't feeling well, and thank goodness she didn't come. But so she saw that, and my dad was, what happened is, his older brother probably should have got married first. He's very introvert, so when my dad used to go with his brother for Rishte, they used to do proposals, they used to like my dad, and they would propose to him. They said, oh no, we like him, and that was not done in those days. And my grandmother, she wanted someone that would fit in with the family, and who's more, homely, and rather than somebody that was quite bold, and So she noticed my mum, and the families knew each other. Like, we've got relatives in common with each other. Just a quick one. They used to debate, oh, I'm related to them more, and I'm related to them more. Although they weren't cousins, they had, how it is. So my dad actually, he joked that it was a forced marriage because his mum used to stand there with the slipper saying, say yes, say yes, say yes. So there were lots of things going on there. My dad saw my mum playing badminton and he's seen her in different places. And then her cousin and her older sister tricked her because they wanted them to meet and said, oh, can you just take a tray of tea, there's some guests. And she was looking down, she was very, she was shy, etc. And she could see his shoes and they were really, really shiny. And my dad was very sort of debonair and, he was very well dressed. So she didn't realise he was the one, but then they got married. And they were actually the glamorous couple. And there's a bit in there, I'm not going to tell you that bit, you need to buy the book. But they were likened to JFK and Jackie Kennedy. And when you see the photograph,